It was one of those perfect summer afternoons when the sun hung lazily in the sky, casting golden rays over everything it touched. The air carried a soft warmth, and the faint sound of children laughing could be heard from nearby yards. In the gated community of Willow Creek Estates, life moved at a slow, comfortable pace. This neighborhood was known for its manicured lawns, sparkling amenities, and residents who prided themselves on living in what they considered an exclusive slice of paradise. Dr. Evelyn Carter stepped out onto the pool deck, her sandals clicking lightly against the tiled surface. She had spent most of her week juggling meetings, reviewing cases, and addressing emergencies as the city's police chief, a role she handled with grace, determination, and unwavering integrity. But today, she wasn't Chief Carter. She was just Evelyn, a woman looking forward to some well-deserved downtime. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and she wore a simple swimsuit that matched the calm blue of the water before her. A paperback book rested under her arm, its pages promising escape from the stresses of her demanding job. Evelyn found her favorite spot by the pool, a quiet corner shaded by tall palm trees where she could relax without being disturbed. She spread out her towel on one of the lounge chairs and settled in, letting out a contented sigh. For once, there were no phone calls interrupting her peace, no urgent reports requiring her attention. Just the gentle hum of cicadas and the occasional splash of kids playing in the shallow end. It felt like perfection. As Evelyn flipped open her book, she noticed a man walking toward the pool area. He looked to be in his late 40s, dressed in khaki shorts and a polo shirt that screamed suburban dad. His face was stern. His jaw clenched tightly as though he'd been chewing on something sour all morning. At first, Evelyn thought nothing of him. He was probably another resident coming to enjoy the sunshine. But then she realized he was heading straight for her. The man stopped a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest. His eyes scanned her up and down, lingering just long enough to make Evelyn feel uncomfortable. She lowered her book slightly, giving him a polite smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her tone friendly. Instead of answering, the man tilted his head to the side, his expression hardening further. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. Evelyn blinked, surprised by the question. "I'm using the pool," she replied evenly, unsure if he was joking or genuinely confused. "Is there a problem?" "There sure is," the man shot back. "This is a private facility for residents only. You shouldn't be here." Evelyn frowned, feeling a flicker of irritation but choosing to remain calm. "I am a resident," she said firmly. "I live in this community, so I have every right to use the pool." The man scoffed, shaking his head dismissively. "Come on, don't play games with me. People like you don't live in places like this." "People like me?" Evelyn repeated, raising an eyebrow. She already knew where this conversation was headed, but she wanted him to say it outright. "You know what I mean," he snapped, his tone growing more aggressive. "Look around, you stick out like a sore thumb. If you're really a resident, prove it." At this point, Evelyn could feel her patience wearing thin. She didn't owe anyone proof of her identity simply because of the color of her skin. Still, she decided to take the high ground. Pulling out her phone, she opened the app for the community's gate system and showed him the digital key linked to her address. "Does this count as proof?" she asked coolly. But the man barely glanced at the screen. "That doesn't mean anything," he muttered. "You could have gotten that from someone else." By now, other people had started to notice the exchange. A couple of women sitting nearby exchanged uneasy glances, while a group of teenagers paused their game of Marco Polo to watch the scene unfold. Some looked sympathetic toward Evelyn, while others seemed hesitant to get involved. No one said a word. Evelyn took a deep breath, reminding herself that losing her temper wouldn't solve anything. She stood up slowly, meeting the man's gaze, with steady confidence. "Sir, I understand you may have concerns," she began, her voice measured and professional. "But accusing me of trespassing based on assumptions isn't fair or appropriate. I pay my dues here just like everyone else. So unless you have actual evidence that I don't belong, I suggest we both go back to enjoying our day." For a brief moment, The man hesitated as though considering whether to back down, but instead he doubled down, his face turning red with frustration. Fine. If you won't leave voluntarily, I'll call security. Let them deal with you. Evelyn resisted the urge to roll her eyes. This situation was spiraling quickly, and she couldn't help but wonder how someone could be so blind to their own biases. Still, she refused to let his behavior ruin her afternoon. With a small, knowing smile, she folded her arms across her chest and waited. Little did he know, calling security would turn out to be the biggest mistake he'd made all day. The tension between Evelyn and the man, later identified as Greg Thompson, was thick enough to cut with a knife. By now, a small crowd had gathered around the pool area, drawn by the rising volume of their voices. Some residents sat frozen, in their lounge chairs, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Others whispered nervously among themselves, speculating about what was happening. The peaceful afternoon ambiance had been shattered, replaced by an uncomfortable undercurrent of hostility. Greg's face was flushed red, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he assumed was beneath him. You think showing me some app proves anything? He barked, his voice carrying across the pool deck. I don't believe you for a second. You're trespassing, plain and simple. Evelyn, however, remained unshaken. She crossed her arms over her chest, standing tall despite the growing number of eyes on her. Her calm demeanor only seemed to infuriate Greg further. Sir, she said evenly, enunciating each word carefully. You're accusing me of something. Without any basis, I've shown you proof of my residency. If that's not enough for you, then perhaps we should let security handle this. Oh, sure, Greg sneered, throwing up his hands in mock agreement. Let's call security, but don't expect them to side with you when they see the truth. You don't belong here. At this point, Evelyn could feel her patience wearing thin. It wasn't just the absurdity of the situation that bothered her. It was the blatant prejudice behind it. She'd faced discrimination before, both personally and professionally, but it never failed to sting. Still, she refused to let Greg's ignorance ruin her day, or worse, give him the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. Deciding to take matters into her own hands, Evelyn pulled out her phone again. This time she dialed the community's security office directly, asking them to send someone to the pool immediately. As she hung up, she turned back to Greg with a raised eyebrow. Happy now? She asked dryly. Security will be here shortly to sort this out. Instead of calming down, Greg grew even more agitated. Fine, he spat, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. But while we wait, why don't you explain how you managed to buy a house in a place like this? People like you usually can't afford it. The words hit Evelyn like a slap, though she didn't flinch outwardly. She knew exactly what he meant by people like you. It wasn't about income or property values. It was about race, about assumptions, about stereotypes, rooted in decades of systemic inequality. And yet, instead of lashing out, Evelyn chose to respond with quiet authority. Mr. Thompson, she began, her tone firm but controlled. I earned my place here through hard work and determination, just like anyone else in this neighborhood. My success isn't defined by your narrow-minded beliefs, nor does it require your approval. So unless you have legitimate proof that I'm violating community rules, which I assure you I'm not, I suggest you stop wasting everyone's time. Her words seemed to catch Greg off guard, if only for a moment. For the first time since the confrontation began, he faltered, glancing around at the growing audience. Several neighbors were openly glaring at him now, their expressions ranging from disapproval to outright disgust. One elderly woman shook her head sadly, muttering under her breath, "This is ridiculous." Despite the mounting pressure, Greg refused to back down. Instead, he doubled down on his accusations, raising his voice even louder. You can say whatever you want, but I know the truth. You're lying, and sooner or later, everyone will see it too. By now, the entire pool area had fallen silent, all except for the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional splash of water from the kids' section. Even the teenagers who had been horsing around earlier had stopped playing, their attention fully focused on the escalating drama unfolding before them. Some residents looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly in their seats as they debated whether to step in. Others exchanged worried glances, silently urging Greg to drop the issue before things got worse. Evelyn, meanwhile, felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: frustration, sadness, and yes, even a tinge of anger. But above all, she felt a deep sense of resolve. She'd spent years fighting for justice and equality in her role as police chief, often facing resistance from people who doubted her abilities because of her gender or skin color. Yet here she was, standing strong against another wave of prejudice, determined to prove that no amount of hatred could shake her foundation. As the minutes ticked by, the sound of footsteps echoed across the pool deck. 2 uniformed security guards appeared, their presence immediately drawing everyone's attention. They approached cautiously, glancing between Evelyn and Greg as they tried to assess the situation. "We received a report of a disturbance," one of them said, addressing both parties. "Can someone explain what's going on?" Before Greg could launch into another tirade, Evelyn stepped forward, her expression calm but commanding. "Yes, officer," she said, using the term deliberately to establish authority. "This gentleman," she gestured toward Greg, "is accusing me of trespassing and refusing to accept that I'm a resident here. I've already shown him digital verification of my address, but he insists on causing a scene." The security guards exchanged a quick look, clearly taken aback by the intensity of the situation. One of them turned to Greg, asking him to share his side of the story. But as Greg stammered through his explanation, his arguments sounded increasingly flimsy, even to himself. When pressed for evidence to support his claims, he struggled to come up with anything concrete beyond vague insinuations and baseless accusations. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained composed, answering the guards' questions with clarity and poise. She provided additional documentation proving her residency, including recent utility bills and a copy of her homeowners association membership card. Each piece of evidence only served to highlight the absurdity of Greg's behavior, leaving him looking more foolish by the minute. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the guards turned to Greg with a stern expression. "Sir, based on the information we've gathered, it appears that Ms. Carter is indeed a resident of this community. Unless you have further evidence to dispute her status, we'll need to ask you to refrain from making unfounded accusations moving forward." Greg opened his mouth to protest but thought better of it. Realizing he had no leg to stand on, he muttered something under his breath and stormed off, his shoulders hunched in defeat. The crowd watched him leave in stunned silence, the weight of his actions sinking in for everyone present. As the security guards thanked Evelyn for her cooperation and returned to their posts, the atmosphere slowly began to shift. Neighbors who had been hesitant to speak up earlier now approached Evelyn, offering words of support and admiration for the way she handled the situation. "That was incredible," one woman said, shaking her head in disbelief. "He had no right to treat you like that." Evelyn smiled faintly, appreciating the gesture but still feeling drained from the ordeal. "Thank you," she replied softly. "Unfortunately, this kind of thing happens more often than it should, but I hope today serves as a reminder that we all deserve respect, regardless of our differences." With that, she gathered her belongings and headed back to her lounge chair, eager to reclaim the peace and quiet she'd been promised at the start of the afternoon. Though the confrontation was over, its impact lingered, not just for Evelyn, but for the entire community. Little did anyone realize, however, that the real reckoning was yet to come. The confrontation at the pool had left a sour taste in everyone's mouths, but for Evelyn, it was more than just an unpleasant memory. It was a stark reminder of the biases she faced daily, even in spaces where she should feel safe and respected. As she sat back down on her lounge chair, trying to reclaim the serenity of the afternoon, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some residents lingered nearby, clearly torn between wanting to support Evelyn and feeling awkward about how to approach her. Others quickly dispersed, retreating to their homes or leaving the pool altogether, unable to process what had just unfolded. Despite the lingering tension, Evelyn decided to stay put. She wasn't going to let Greg's behavior chase her away from her own community. Still, as she opened her book again, she couldn't shake the frustration simmering beneath the surface. The confrontation had been exhausting, not because of Greg's words themselves, which were all too familiar, but because of the energy it took to remain composed and professional in the face of such blatant prejudice. Just as Evelyn began to lose herself in the pages of her novel, a middle-aged woman approached her cautiously. Her name was Susan, one of Evelyn's neighbors who lived 2 houses down. Susan had always struck Evelyn as polite but reserved, someone who kept to herself most of the time. But now, standing there with a hesitant smile, Susan seemed determined to say something meaningful. "Evelyn," Susan began, her voice soft but sincere, "I just wanted to apologize for everything that happened here today. That man's behavior was completely unacceptable, and I'm so sorry you had to deal with that." Evelyn looked up, surprised by the unexpected gesture. "Thank you," she replied warmly. "It means a lot to hear that." Susan nodded, glancing around nervously before continuing. "To be honest, I've seen things like this happen before. Not always so openly, but you can feel it sometimes, you know? People making assumptions based on appearances." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What he did was wrong, and I hope he realizes that soon. But I also want you to know that not everyone here thinks like him." Her words resonated deeply with Evelyn, who appreciated the effort Susan was making to bridge the gap between them. It wasn't easy to confront uncomfortable truths, especially within your own community, but Susan's willingness to acknowledge the problem gave Evelyn a small sense of hope. "Thank you for saying that," Evelyn said gently. "It's nice to know there are people like you who care." As Susan walked away, Evelyn noticed another neighbor approaching. This time it was Mark, a younger man who often jogged past her house in the mornings. He introduced himself shyly, explaining that he hadn't known Evelyn very well until now. "I saw what happened earlier," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "And honestly, I don't think anyone deserves to be treated like that. Not in their own neighborhood." Evelyn smiled faintly, touched by his sincerity. "It's frustrating, but these things happen," she said with a shrug. "All we can do is keep pushing for change." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "Well, if there's ever anything you need, whether it's signing petitions or starting initiatives, I'd be happy to help. We should make sure Willow Creek is a place where everyone feels welcome." His offer caught Evelyn off guard, but in the best possible way. For years she had worked tirelessly to promote inclusivity and equality in her professional life, yet hearing those same values echoed by someone in her personal space felt incredibly validating. "That means a lot," she told him sincerely. "If you're serious about helping, maybe we can talk more later. There's definitely room for improvement here." Word of the incident spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, thanks in part to social media. By evening, posts about the confrontation had popped up on local forums and Facebook groups, sparking heated debates among residents. Some praised Evelyn for handling the situation with grace and dignity, while others criticized Greg for his blatant racism. A few tried to defend him, arguing that he simply didn't know better or suggesting that Evelyn should have ignored him altogether. But the majority of comments leaned heavily in Evelyn's favor, with many expressing shock and disappointment over Greg's actions. Amidst the online chatter, Evelyn received dozens of messages from neighbors she barely knew, all offering support and admiration for the way she handled herself. One message stood out in particular. It was from Mrs. Patel, an elderly widow who lived across the street. In her note, Mrs. Patel wrote, "Dear Evelyn, I've always admired your strength and kindness. Today proved that you truly embody what it means to lead by example. Please know that you have allies here, even if we haven't spoken much before." Reading those words brought tears to Evelyn's eyes. It wasn't just the sentiment itself that moved her. It was the realization that her quiet resilience had inspired others to speak up and take a stand. For years, she had fought battles both big and small, often feeling isolated in her efforts. But now, surrounded by messages of solidarity, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Greg's world was unraveling. After storming off from the pool, he returned home fuming, convinced that he'd been unfairly targeted. He spent hours pacing his living room, replaying the confrontation in his mind, and growing angrier with each passing minute. How dare they side with her? Didn't anyone see that he was just trying to protect the integrity of the neighborhood? Desperate to justify his actions, Greg logged onto the community's private Facebook group and posted a lengthy rant defending himself. "I was only looking out for our community," he wrote, his tone defensive and bitter. "If someone looks suspicious, it's my duty as a resident to question them. Why is everyone attacking me for doing the right thing?" His post backfired spectacularly. Within minutes, comment after comment flooded in, tearing apart his argument and calling him out for his hypocrisy. One neighbor pointed out that Greg had never questioned other newcomers in the past, implying that his concerns were rooted in bias rather than genuine curiosity. Another shared a screenshot of Evelyn's HOA membership card, proving beyond doubt that she belonged in the community. Even some of Greg's closest friends distanced themselves publicly, unwilling to associate with someone whose behavior reflected so poorly on the neighborhood. By nightfall, Greg was drowning in a sea of backlash. His phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, each one delivering another blow to his fragile ego. Calls poured in from fellow board members urging him to issue an apology, while others demanded his immediate resignation from the Homeowners Association. Feeling cornered and humiliated, Greg lashed out at anyone who dared criticize him, digging himself deeper into a hole he couldn't escape. Evelyn, meanwhile, chose not to engage with the drama unfolding online. While she appreciated the outpouring of support, she didn't want to fuel the fire or give Greg any more attention than he already had. Instead, she focused on using the moment as an opportunity for positive change. That evening, she drafted a letter addressed to the entire community, outlining her vision for a more inclusive and welcoming neighborhood. In the letter, Evelyn acknowledged the challenges they faced as a community, but emphasized the importance of working together to overcome them. She proposed organizing workshops on diversity and inclusion, inviting experts to speak about unconscious bias and systemic inequality. She also suggested creating a committee dedicated to fostering open dialogue among residents, ensuring that everyone's voices were heard and valued. When she sent the letter to the HOA board the next morning, it sparked a wave of enthusiasm. Many residents praised Evelyn for her leadership and commitment to progress, pledging their support for her initiatives. Even those who had previously been indifferent to issues of race and privilege found themselves inspired by her determination to create lasting change. For Evelyn, the response was both gratifying and humbling. It reinforced her belief that even in the darkest moments there was always room for growth, and that sometimes all it took was one brave act of defiance to ignite a spark of transformation. As she prepared for bed that night, exhausted but hopeful, she allowed herself a small smile. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew she wasn't walking it alone. The days following the pool incident brought a whirlwind of activity to Willow Creek Estates. What had started as a tense confrontation between Evelyn and Greg quickly escalated into a community-wide reckoning, forcing residents to confront uncomfortable truths about bias, privilege, and belonging. The fallout wasn't limited to private conversations or online forums. It spilled over into official channels, sparking heated discussions among members of the Homeowners Association, HOA board. By midweek, the HOA called an emergency meeting to address the situation. Notices were sent out via email and posted on bulletin boards throughout the neighborhood, urging all residents to attend. The agenda included a review of the recent events at the pool, potential consequences for Greg's behavior, and steps the community could take to prevent similar incidents in the future. For many, this was uncharted territory. Rarely had such divisive issues been brought to the forefront in Willow Creek, where life typically revolved around barbecues, holiday parties, and friendly small talk. Evelyn arrived at the clubhouse early, dressed in a crisp navy blue blazer that exuded professionalism without being overly formal. She carried herself with quiet confidence, aware that all eyes would be on her during the meeting. As she took her seat near the front of the room, neighbors greeted her warmly, some offering hugs or pats on the back. Others hung back, unsure how to approach her after the video of the confrontation had gone viral. Despite the mixed reactions, Evelyn felt a sense of purpose. This was her chance not only to share her perspective but also to advocate for meaningful change within the community. When the meeting began, the atmosphere was tense. Chairs creaked as attendees shifted uncomfortably, and the air buzzed with murmured whispers. The HOA president, a soft-spoken man named Richard, opened the session by acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "We're here today because something deeply troubling occurred in our community," he said, his voice steady but somber. "It's important that we address it openly and honestly so we can move forward together." After a brief overview of what had transpired at the pool, Richard invited Evelyn to speak. As she stood up, the room fell silent. Every gaze was fixed on her, waiting to hear her side of the story. Evelyn took a deep breath before beginning, her tone calm yet resolute. "I never expected to find myself in this position," she admitted, glancing around the room. "When I moved to Willow Creek, I did so because I believed it was a place where my family and I could feel safe, respected, and valued. Unfortunately, recent events have shown me that even in spaces like this, discrimination can rear its ugly head." She recounted the details of the confrontation with Greg, emphasizing how his accusations weren't based on facts but rather assumptions rooted in prejudice. Her words painted a vivid picture of the humiliation and frustration she'd felt standing there, forced to defend her right to exist in her own community. Yet she balanced her account with grace, refusing to stoop to anger or bitterness. "What happened to me isn't unique," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "It's part of a larger pattern, one that affects countless individuals, every single day. But I believe moments like these give us an opportunity to reflect, learn, and grow. We can choose to let this divide us further, or we can use it as a catalyst for positive change." Her speech earned a round of applause, with several residents nodding in agreement. One woman wiped tears from her eyes, visibly moved by Evelyn's courage. Even those who had initially been hesitant to take sides couldn't deny the power of her message. Next, it was Greg's turn to address the group. He shuffled to the front of the room, his usual bravado replaced by nervous fidgeting. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the podium. When he began speaking, his voice cracked under the weight of his shame. I didn't mean for things to go this far," he stammered, avoiding eye contact with Evelyn. "I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting our community. But looking back, I realize now that my actions were wrong. And for that, I'm truly sorry." His apology landed flat, met with skeptical stares and muttered criticisms. Many residents felt it lacked sincerity, especially given his earlier refusal to acknowledge his mistakes publicly. A few people clapped politely, but most remained silent, their expressions unreadable. Following Greg's statement, the floor was opened for discussion. Residents lined up to share their thoughts, and the range of opinions reflected the complexity of the issue. Some praised Evelyn for her composure and leadership, calling her a role model for the community. Others expressed disappointment in Greg, questioning whether someone with such biases should hold a leadership position on the HOA board. One particularly passionate speaker was Mark, the young jogger who had approached Evelyn after the incident. Standing tall, he addressed the crowd with conviction. "This isn't just about one person's bad behavior," he said firmly. "It's about the culture we allow, or don't allow, to thrive here. If we want Willow Creek to be a welcoming place for everyone, then we need to actively work toward creating that environment. That means having tough conversations, addressing biases, and holding each other accountable." His words resonated with many in the audience, prompting nods of approval and murmurs of agreement. Another resident, a mother of two, added her perspective. "My kids are growing up in this neighborhood, and I want them to see examples of kindness and inclusivity, not division and hatred. Let's make sure they learn the right lessons from all of this." As the discussion continued, it became clear that the majority of residents supported taking action. Suggestions ranged from implementing diversity training workshops to revising the HOA's code of conduct to include stricter anti-discrimination policies. Evelyn listened intently, jotting down notes and occasionally chiming in with thoughtful contributions. Her presence inspired others to speak up, turning what could have been a contentious debate into a collaborative brainstorming session. Eventually, the conversation turned back to Greg. While some argued that he deserved a second chance, others insisted his behavior warranted immediate consequences. One longtime resident summarized the sentiment perfectly. Greg made his choice when he decided to treat Evelyn the way he did. Now we have to decide what kind of community we want to be. Do we tolerate this kind of behavior, or do we draw a line in the sand? In the end, the board reached a unanimous decision. Greg would step down from his position on the HOA effective immediately. Though technically voluntary, his resignation came with the understanding that remaining in a leadership role would undermine efforts to rebuild trust within the community. Additionally, the board announced plans to launch a series of initiatives aimed at promoting inclusivity, including mandatory workshops for all residents and new guidelines for handling disputes. When the meeting adjourned, the mood was cautiously optimistic. Residents lingered in the parking lot, exchanging hugs and handshakes as they discussed next steps. Evelyn stayed behind to answer questions and thank those who had spoken out in support of her. As she walked to her car, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but the seeds had been planted, and, for the first time in a long while, Evelyn believed they might actually take root. In the weeks following the HOA meeting, Willow Creek Estates underwent a transformation. Not an overnight one, but a gradual shift that began with small yet meaningful changes. The fallout from Greg's behavior had forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about their community. And while some were eager to move forward, others remained resistant to the idea of change. Still, Evelyn's unwavering commitment to fostering inclusivity inspired many to take action, creating ripples of progress throughout the neighborhood. The first tangible step came in the form of diversity training workshops, which were scheduled for every Saturday morning at the community center. Led by experienced facilitators, these sessions aimed to educate residents on topics like unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and allyship. Flyers advertising the workshops appeared on bulletin boards across the neighborhood, accompanied by a heartfelt message from Evelyn encouraging everyone to participate. "This is our chance to grow together," she wrote. "Let's embrace it." At first, attendance was mixed. Some residents eagerly signed up, eager to learn and contribute to a more welcoming environment. Others dragged their feet, grumbling about political correctness or dismissing the workshops as unnecessary. But as word spread about the impact of the sessions, interest grew. Participants shared stories of personal growth and newfound understanding, sparking curiosity among those who had initially been reluctant to attend. One particularly memorable workshop focused on privilege and systemic inequality. The facilitator used interactive exercises to help attendees recognize how factors like race, income, and education shaped their experiences in ways they might not have considered before. For many, this was an eye-opening moment. A middle-aged man named Tom, who had previously dismissed concerns about discrimination as overblown, admitted afterward that he'd never realized how much easier life had been for him simply because of his background. "I always thought I earned everything I have through hard work," he said during the group discussion. "But now I see there are barriers other people face that I'll never have to deal with. It makes me want to do better, to be better." Stories like Tom's became common as the workshops continued. Residents began having open conversations about race, privilege, and belonging, topics they had once avoided out of discomfort or fear of saying the wrong thing. Slowly but surely, walls started to come down, replaced by bridges of empathy and understanding. Meanwhile, the HOA implemented new policies designed to ensure fairness and accountability within the community. These included stricter guidelines for handling disputes, clearer communication channels for reporting incidents of discrimination, and a renewed emphasis on transparency in decision-making. Signs promoting inclusivity appeared around the neighborhood, reminding everyone of the values Willow Creek now stood for: respect, equality, and unity. For Evelyn, watching these changes unfold was both rewarding and humbling. She attended several workshops herself, using her platform to encourage dialogue and share insights from her own experiences. Her presence brought a sense of gravitas to the discussions, inspiring even the most skeptical residents to engage. One woman who had initially resisted attending the workshops approached Evelyn after a session to thank her for her leadership. "I didn't think I needed this," the woman confessed. "But hearing your story and seeing how you've handled everything with such grace, it's made me realize how important this work really is." While progress was evident, it wasn't without its challenges. Some residents, including a small but vocal minority, pushed back against the changes, claiming they were unnecessary or divisive. A few openly criticized Evelyn, accusing her of using the incident at the pool to push a personal agenda. Though hurtful, Evelyn refused to let these comments derail her efforts. Instead, she leaned on the support of allies who believed in her vision, drawing strength from their encouragement. Greg, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated. After resigning from the HOA board, he retreated from community activities, rarely seen outside his home except for brief trips to the grocery store. Rumors swirled about his mental state. Some neighbors reported hearing raised voices late at night, suggesting tension between him and his family. When he did venture out, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might recognize him. The backlash he faced online hadn't subsided either. Videos of the confrontation at the pool continued to circulate, serving as a stark reminder of his actions. Despite his attempts to fade into the background, Greg couldn't escape the consequences of his behavior. Several local businesses severed ties with him after learning about the incident, citing concerns about associating with someone whose actions contradicted their values. His reputation, once built on success and influence, crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. Friends stopped returning his calls, and invitations to social gatherings dried up entirely. It was a harsh lesson in accountability, one that left him grappling with guilt and regret. As summer gave way to fall, the atmosphere in Willow Creek shifted noticeably. The pool area, once the site of tension and conflict, became a symbol of resilience and renewal. Families gathered there on weekends, laughing and enjoying each other's company without fear of judgment. New signs welcoming visitors of all backgrounds adorned the entrance, reinforcing the message that everyone belonged. Evelyn played a key role in maintaining this momentum. She organized monthly meet and greets where residents could connect over coffee and snacks, fostering relationships across cultural and socioeconomic lines. She also collaborated with the HOA to establish a mentorship program, pairing longtime residents with newcomers, ensuring that no one felt excluded or overlooked. These initiatives helped solidify the sense of community that had begun to take root. One evening, as Evelyn sat on her porch watching the sunset, she reflected on how far they'd come. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, frustration, and resistance, but the progress they'd achieved was undeniable. Willow Creek was no longer just a collection of houses and amenities. It was a place where people cared about each other and worked together to create something better. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Opening it, she found Susan standing there with a plate of homemade cookies. "Just wanted to say thank you again," Susan said with a warm smile. "You've done so much for this community, and I'm grateful to call you my neighbor." Evelyn accepted the gift with gratitude, touched by Susan's kindness. "It's been a team effort," she replied. "None of this would have happened without people like you stepping up and supporting the cause." As Susan walked away, Evelyn returned to her porch, savoring the quiet beauty of the evening. Change was never easy, she reminded herself, but it was always worth fighting for. And though there was still work to be done, she knew Willow Creek was heading in the right direction. One conversation, one policy, and one act of courage at a time. As the months passed, Willow Creek Estates continued to evolve into a community that reflected its residents' collective desire for inclusivity and mutual respect. The initial shock of Greg's behavior had faded, but its impact lingered, in the form of lessons learned, conversations started, and actions taken. For Evelyn, this transformation wasn't just about addressing one incident. It was about creating a culture where such incidents would be less likely to occur in the future. By winter, the diversity workshops had become a cornerstone of life in Willow Creek. What began as a series of mandatory sessions turned into an ongoing initiative, with residents volunteering to lead discussions and share their own stories. Some spoke of growing up in predominantly white neighborhoods and feeling like outsiders. Others shared experiences of being judged based on stereotypes or assumptions. These personal narratives fostered deeper connections among neighbors, breaking down barriers that had long existed beneath the surface. One particularly memorable session featured Mrs. Patel, the elderly widow who lived across the street from Evelyn. She stood before the group, her voice steady despite her frail frame, and recounted her journey immigrating to the United States decades ago. "When I first arrived here, people often treated me as if I didn't belong," she said, her eyes glistening with emotion. "They assumed I couldn't speak English or understand their customs. It was lonely, but I kept my head high because I knew my worth." Hearing what Evelyn went through reminded me of those days, and made me realize how far we've come. Her words resonated deeply with everyone present, drawing tears from some and prompting applause from others. Afterward, several residents approached her to thank her for sharing her story, vowing to do their part to ensure no one else felt unwelcome in their community. The HOA also took significant steps to institutionalize these values. New signage appeared throughout the neighborhood, celebrating diversity and encouraging kindness. Community events became more inclusive, featuring cuisines, music, and traditions from various cultures represented within Willow Creek. During the annual holiday party, for instance, families brought dishes that reflected their heritage, turning the gathering into a vibrant celebration of shared humanity. Even small gestures like adding multilingual labels to public spaces demonstrated the community's commitment to embracing difference rather than fearing it. For Evelyn, these changes weren't just professional victories, they were personal affirmations. As someone who had spent her career advocating for justice and equality, seeing those principles take root in her own backyard filled her with pride. Yet she remained humble, always deflecting praise onto the efforts of her neighbors. "This isn't about me," she'd say whenever someone thanked her. "It's about all of us working together to build something better." Still, there were moments when the weight of everything she'd endured caught up with her. On quiet nights sitting alone by the fireplace, Evelyn allowed herself to reflect on the emotional toll of the confrontation at the pool. The memory of Greg's accusatory tone, the sting of his words, and the awkward silence of bystanders, it all came rushing back, leaving her drained yet resolute. But then she'd remind herself of the progress made since that day, finding solace in the knowledge that her strength had inspired others to stand up and speak out. Greg, meanwhile, faded further into obscurity. His attempts to rebuild his reputation fell flat, as few were willing to forgive or forget his behavior. He eventually listed his house for sale, citing personal reasons as his motivation for leaving Willow Creek. When new buyers, a young interracial couple with 2 children, moved in shortly thereafter, many residents saw it as a symbolic victory. The home once occupied by intolerance now belonged to a family that embodied the very ideals Greg had rejected. Life in Willow Creek settled into a rhythm of growth and renewal. The mentorship program Evelyn helped establish flourished, pairing longtime residents with newcomers to ease transitions and foster friendships. Monthly potlucks brought neighbors together, creating opportunities for laughter, storytelling, and bonding over shared meals. And the newly formed Inclusivity Committee, led by Mark and Susan, worked tirelessly to address any lingering issues while promoting education and awareness. One crisp spring morning, Evelyn decided to revisit the pool, the site of the confrontation that had sparked so much change. She arrived early, before anyone else, carrying a thermos of coffee and a blanket. Sitting by the water's edge, she watched as sunlight danced across the surface, casting shimmering reflections on the surrounding tiles. The air smelled fresh, tinged with the promise of blooming flowers and warmer days ahead. As she sipped her coffee, Evelyn thought about how far they'd come. The pool area, once a place of tension and hostility, now symbolized resilience and unity. Families gathered there regularly, laughing and playing without fear of judgment. Signs welcoming visitors of all backgrounds adorned the entrance, reinforcing the message that everyone belonged. It was a testament to the power of collective effort, and a reminder that even in the face of adversity, communities could choose to rise above. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Turning around, she saw Mark and Susan walking toward her, each holding a cup of tea. They greeted her warmly, sitting down beside her without invitation. "We figured you might be here," Mark said with a grin. "Thought you could use some company." Evelyn smiled, touched by their thoughtfulness. "You know me too well," she replied, gesturing for them to join her. Together, they sat in companionable silence, watching as the sun climbed higher in the sky. After a while, Susan broke the quiet. "Do you ever think about how different things are now compared to last summer?" she asked, glancing at Evelyn. "I mean, look at us. We're sitting here, enjoying this beautiful day, and not a single person feels out of place. That's something special." "It is," Evelyn agreed, nodding slowly. "But let's not forget, it didn't happen overnight. It took hard work, patience, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. We still have room to grow, but I'm proud of what we've accomplished so far." Mark chimed in, his tone thoughtful. "And none of it would have been possible without you, Evelyn. You set the tone for all of this. Your courage gave us permission to step up and do our part." Evelyn shook her head modestly. "I may have started the conversation, but you two, and everyone else, kept it going. This is your victory as much as mine." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, upcoming community events, plans for summer barbecues, and the latest antics of Susan's mischievous golden retriever. As they laughed and joked, Evelyn felt a profound sense of gratitude for her neighbors, for her community, and for the resilience that had carried them through difficult times. Later that afternoon, as Evelyn strolled back home, she paused to admire the blossoms dotting the trees lining her street. Each petal seemed to whisper a message of hope and renewal, reminding her that growth often followed periods of struggle. Willow Creek wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was, moving in the right direction. And for Evelyn, that was enough. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, and challenges undoubtedly lay in wait. But armed with determination, compassion, and the support of those around her, Evelyn knew they could face whatever came next. After all, progress wasn't about reaching perfection. It was about striving to be better every single day. And in that spirit, Willow Creek and Evelyn herself would continue to thrive.